3 a.m., and Boston was still awake. The city breathed like a giant beast in slumber, the streets glistening under a cold rain where only a few yellow lights still burned. Claire Donovan sat alone inside the 24-hour laundromat, where the smell of detergent mixed with steam to form a thick, hazy mist. She folded a stack of white shirts, her hands trembling with fatigue. Each crisply folded shirt seemed to hold the neat, bloodless fragments of someone else's long day. She sighed. The job wasn't bad, but it wasn't enough to live on. 26 years old, once a biochemistry major at Brown University, Claire now had nothing left but calloused hands, $30,000 of student debt, and a beat-up car that refused to start whenever it rained. She thought her life had hit its lowest point when the clock struck 3:47. She was wrong. Fate hadn't even begun. The shop door swung open, the bell chiming through the stillness. A tall man stepped in, his rain-soaked coat dark as ink, his hair dripping, his eyes carrying the storm with them. He set a black leather bag on the counter, too refined for this row of aging machines. "Emergency service," he said in a deep, measured voice, the tone of someone more accustomed to giving orders than making requests. 5 shirts? I need them back in 3 hours. Keep it confidential." Claire frowned. Confidential, she repeated, half curious, half wary. He nodded and pulled a thick envelope from his pocket. Cash, lots of it. Double the usual rate. No questions, no name. She looked at him more closely. Sharp features, steel gray eyes, and a controlled menace that made her heart beat faster for no reason she could name. He wasn't the kind of man one could easily read. Danger wrapped in elegance. When he left, Claire opened the bag. 5 white shirts, Italian silk, hand-stitched, worth at least $400 each. And then she froze. Dark red stains spread across the cuffs and collars. Not a nosebleed, not a scrape. She'd studied anatomy. That color, that viscosity, it was human blood. Outside, the wind rattled the glass. Claire took a deep breath, forcing herself to think. If she called the police, they'd bombard her with questions, search the shop, trace the client, and she, the laundress, would become the most dangerous link in the chain. But if she stayed silent... Her eyes drifted to the sign above the counter, Claire's Laundry. Open all night with care. Rent was due in 4 days. Her bank account held $63. "It's just work," she whispered. "Wash, get paid, forget." She put on gloves, started the machine, and mixed hydrogen peroxide with enzymes exactly as she'd once done in lab experiments. The cold water swirled into a brick-red vortex, disturbingly beautiful. The blood dissolved, but guilt did not. Thunder rolled, lights flickered. And then, feeling watched, Claire lifted her head. Through the glass, she saw a figure standing motionless outside. Her pulse spiked. The door burst open. The same man walked in, no coat this time, only a black suit that caught the light on a silver watch. His gaze swept the room cold, assessing, but when it landed on her, it softened, just barely. "You did better than I expected," he murmured, almost a compliment. "You came back sooner than I thought. Couldn't wait." He stepped closer. "I forgot to mention if anyone asks. You never saw me. Never washed those shirts." "What are you hiding?" Claire asked before she could stop herself. He halted half a step away, a truth that could get people killed. She swallowed. "You're joking, right?" His eyes met hers. No trace of humor. Then, quieter. "If someone comes in tonight, go to the back. Don't answer, no matter what they say." Before she could reply, an engine roared outside fast, angry. Headlights flashed across the window. The man Henry turned sharply, his expression hardening. "They found this place." What? He reached for her hand. "They followed me. Now they think you're involved." Before Claire could react, the window shattered. A bullet tore through the open sign. She screamed as Henry yanked her to the floor. Glass exploded. Washing machines cracked open. "Move!" he shouted, steady but fierce. She let him drag her toward the back, through the emergency exit into a narrow alley. Rain and gunpowder filled the air. A black SUV idled nearby, headlights flickering. Henry opened the rear door and pushed her inside. "Who are you?" she gasped. "The man who just saved your life," he said, sliding into the passenger seat. and the one who just got you hunted. The car sped off. Through the rear window, Claire watched the laundromat, the only safe place she'd ever had, go up in flames. A burning exclamation mark against the night. Tears blurred her vision. In the rearview mirror, Henry's eyes were like ice, but behind them flickered something that looked a lot like regret. "You owe me an explanation," she whispered. "You'll get one," he replied. "If we make it out of Boston alive." She turned to study him. "So what do I call you?" His gaze lingered on her long enough to make her heart skip. Henry Sullivan. The name struck like a slow, tolling bell. Not unfamiliar. She'd heard it before in a vague news report about New York's underground syndicates. A name that made both cops and criminals tread carefully. Henry Sullivan, financier of the underworld. The SUV veered onto the highway. Rain kept falling. Claire looked down at her trembling hands, the same hands that had just washed away his blood. She couldn't tell if she was a victim or a player in a game with no way out. But when he turned his head and said softly, "Trust me, Claire, tonight is only the beginning." She knew her life had just veered off course into a world where love, guilt, and destiny intertwine. If this story makes you wonder what awaits when dawn comes, follow to step deeper into Claire and Henry's world in part 2. Every choice, every drop of blood, leaves behind a confession. The rain hadn't stopped. Boston lay beneath a shimmering haze of streetlights, and the SUV raced down the highway like a shadow fleeing from itself. Claire sat curled up in the back seat, her heart pounding wildly. The scent of new leather mingled with the faint trace of gunpowder on Henry's clothes, thickening the air. She couldn't decide whether she should fear him or trust him. The man who had just saved her life was the same man who had brought bloodstained shirts to her laundromat only hours before. "Are you all right?" His deep voice broke the silence, eyes never leaving the road. "All right, are you serious? My laundromat just blew up." "It didn't blow up," he said calmly, watching the rearview mirror. "Just bullets and fire. They wanted to scare you. With me, it never stops at fear." Claire turned toward the rain-streaked window. The droplets caught the red gleam of taillights. "Who are they?" Henry didn't answer. Only the rhythmic sound of the wipers filled the air. She almost thought he wouldn't speak again. Then, quietly, "The ones who want me dead." She met his gaze in the mirror. His eyes weren't those of a criminal. They were the eyes of a man who had lived too long in darkness to remember what light felt like. "And now," he said softly, "they'll want you dead too." Her fingers tightened. "I have nothing to do with you." Henry tilted his head slightly. "In this world, Claire, no one's ever truly uninvolved. You just don't know it yet." They drove in silence for nearly an hour, crossing slick streets until the city lights disappeared behind them. When the SUV turned down a wooded road, she saw a mansion ahead, its golden windows glowing like a predator hiding behind luxury. The iron gate swung open automatically. A tall, silver-haired man was waiting. "Welcome back, Mr. Sullivan," he said evenly, as if tonight's chaos were routine. "Everything is prepared." Henry nodded. "Eli, this is Claire Donovan. She'll be staying for a while." Eli, clearly a bodyguard or assistant, greeted her with polite suspicion. Inside, the grand hall was overwhelming high ceilings, oil paintings lining the walls, warm amber light glinting off polished oak floors. The air smelled of oak wood and aged wine. It was a world entirely foreign to her. No detergent, no steam, no aching hands. "This isn't a hotel," she murmured. "I shouldn't be here." "You're not safe anywhere else," Henry replied. "You could take me to the police." And say what he turned toward her, eyes sharp and sorrowful, "that you washed blood from my shirts." Who do you think they'd believe, a crime boss or a night shift laundress? They'd turn you into evidence, not a witness. She fell silent. He was right, and she hated that he was. The room he gave her was upstairs, facing the back garden. White curtains fluttered in the cool air. Everything looked too perfect, too pure a life that wasn't hers. Henry lingered at the door, hands in his pockets. "There are clothes in the wardrobe, bathrooms on the right. Breakfast will be brought up in the morning. If you need anything, just ask." Her voice trembled. "Why are you doing this?" "Because I washed your shirts." He paused, his eyes softening just a fraction. "Because if you die, I won't sleep again." The door closed quietly behind him. Claire stood frozen, her heart skipping a beat. That night, she couldn't sleep. The silence was too heavy, the room too unfamiliar. Every creak startled her. Only at dawn, when the first light slipped through the curtains, did she drift off half dreaming, half hearing the door open and the faintest sound of footsteps. When she awoke, a breakfast tray sat waiting hot coffee, toast, and a few neatly sliced oranges. Beside it lay a small note. "Don't leave the house until I return." H. The handwriting was strong, slanted, disciplined. A man who lived by control, even in chaos. She took a sip of the coffee, bitter, but oddly grounding. Opening the window, she breathed in the crisp air. The garden below was vast, white roses glowing in sunlight. Farther out, men in black suits patrolled the perimeter. Henry Sullivan, clearly not just a businessman. By noon, she ventured downstairs. Jazz music floated through the living room. The air smelled faintly of whiskey and smoke. Henry stood by the tall windows, watching the garden. He wasn't wearing a jacket, just a rolled-up white shirt, top buttons undone. He looked younger than she'd thought, 30. Maybe a little more, but his eyes carried lifetimes. "Did you sleep?" he asked, still facing the window. "No." "Because of the rain, or because you're afraid of me?" "Both," she admitted. He gave a short, quiet laugh. "Fear makes sense. I'm not a good man." "Then who are you?" "Henry." He turned to her. The light cut across his face, sharp and merciless. A man who once believed he could do bad things for good reasons until he realized blood is still blood, no matter whom it's spilled for. The words struck deep. She thought of the red water swirling in the washing machine. The stain might have faded, but the memory clung. So now I'm part of it too. Henry stepped closer, stopping just short of her. "No, Claire, you were simply in the wrong place, on the wrong night." Her voice was barely a whisper. "Have you killed people?" Silence. Then, evenly, "Yes." But none of them were innocent. She gave a small, bitter laugh. "And I'm supposed to believe that?" "No." "But you're still here." He turned away, as if the truth itself burned. Later that day, Eli entered with an envelope. "Message from New York. Versani's men are moving. They might come here." Henry's expression hardened as he read. For a moment, his composure cracked, revealing the ruthless strategist beneath. "Get the car ready," he said. "We're leaving Boston tonight." Eli nodded and left. Claire rose sharply. "I'm not going anywhere." Henry's calm was terrifying. "You don't have a choice. You think you get to decide my life." "You can choose," he said quietly. "Come with me and live or stay here and die. I'm not ordering you. Claire, I'm telling you the truth." Her breath caught. He wasn't threatening her, but something in his tone made her believe him. Staying meant death. "Why do they want to kill me?" "Because you touched something you shouldn't have." "The shirts?" "The blood." Henry said, "What you washed last night was evidence from a purge. They think you know more than you do, and that's enough." Her knees felt weak. "And you? Who are you in all this?" Henry's gaze held hers. The only fool left who still believes he can save an innocent person in a world built on lies. His voice wasn't loud, but it echoed inside her like a vow. That night, as the car pulled away from the mansion, Claire watched the city lights fade into the distance. She knew her ordinary life was gone for good. Henry drove in silence. Highway lights brushed across his face, half in shadow, half in glow, as if even the light couldn't decide which side he belonged to. Claire turned to him, her voice trembling like a confession. "If I trust you, will there ever come a day when I don't have to be afraid?" Henry didn't look away from the road. "No, but at least you'll know what you're afraid of." Outside. The rain began again. Amid the sound of wind and wheels, Claire realized her heartbeat matched the man beside her, the stranger she shouldn't want to understand, yet couldn't stop thinking about. And as they drove away from Boston, she unknowingly crossed into his world, a world where love was dangerous, and truth was sometimes more terrifying than death. The Boston rain was behind them. As the car crossed the long bridge over the Hudson River, dawn broke like a thin ribbon of light between two worlds where night had not yet withdrawn, and day was still hesitant to begin. Claire leaned her head against the window, watching the water shimmer into shards of silver. She had no idea how long they'd driven in silence, only that her hands were still cold. Henry sat at the wheel, calm as ever, as if the chase the night before had been nothing but a dream. When they arrived, she almost forgot to breathe. The mansion stood by the riverbank, half hidden behind a line of blazing red maple trees. It wasn't ostentatiously grand, but elegant in its restrained gray stone walls, tall glass windows, curved eaves, and a quietness that felt both safe and suffocating. Henry stopped the car and opened her door. "Welcome to the sanctuary." Claire stepped out. The river wind carried the chill scent of water and leaves. At the entrance stood a middle-aged woman in a uniform, bowing politely. "This is Mrs. Nolan," Henry introduced. "She takes care of the place. Think of it as home." Claire forced a small smile. Home, the word felt almost cruel in a place like this, too vast, too quiet, where every object seemed deliberately placed, each painting, each antique clock. What struck her most, though, was the emptiness. There were no signs that anyone else had ever lived here. Her room was upstairs, overlooking the river. When the door opened, morning light spilled across the floor, turning everything a pale shade of gold. On the table sat a vase of white tulips, a blank notebook, and a black ink pen. No one said it aloud, but she knew Henry had arranged them. When she was alone, Claire sat down and opened the notebook. The first page was empty, except for a single line written in the firm, familiar hand. "Every truth begins with the courage to write down what you fear most." She smiled, faintly confused, moved, and unsure why she believed he'd written it for her. That afternoon, as sunlight rippled over the river, Claire saw Henry standing on the lower balcony, a glass of wine in hand. He leaned casually against the railing, white shirt open at the collar, hair tousled by the breeze. There was something almost painterly about him, like a figure captured in a portrait of solitude. She walked down. He turned at the sound of her footsteps, a flicker of a smile crossing his face. "Beautiful view, isn't it?" he asked. "Beautiful enough to make me forget I'm a prisoner." Henry chuckled softly, setting his glass aside. "If I wanted to imprison you, there are easier ways. Then why bring me here?" He looked back toward the river. His voice was low. "Because this place is the border between two worlds. Here, no one can find you, and no one can find me." "You're hiding no," he said quietly, "just taking a few days off from the world I created." That evening, Mrs. Nolan prepared dinner. Claire sat across from Henry in the spacious dining room, candlelight glinting on crystal glasses. The meal was simple red wine, steak, toasted bread, but the air between them was taut as a wire. She studied him, searching for a crack in his composure. "Has anyone ever lived here with you?" Henry paused mid-cut, then looked up. "Yes, but a long time ago." "She left?" He hesitated, then said evenly, "She died. Because of me." Claire's hand tightened around her fork. He said it without flinching, without defense, like a scar long healed but never forgotten. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "Don't be," he murmured. "Sometimes loss is the only proof that we were ever alive." Later that night, Henry stepped out onto the porch. Claire couldn't sleep. From behind the curtain, she watched him smoke his face lit by the soft glow of the cigarette, framed in drifting mist. There was a loneliness to him so raw it felt almost sacred. Something in her chest stirred not pity, but a deep, inexplicable pull. The urge to understand him, to touch the world behind those eyes. She wrapped herself in a coat and stepped outside. He didn't turn, but his voice came low through the dark. "You shouldn't be out here. The river wind's cold at night. I could say the same to you." He smiled faintly. "You're stubborn." "Because I don't know who to trust anymore." Henry turned then, his gaze soft but haunted. "You don't have to trust me, Claire. Just know that if I ever wanted to hurt you, it would have happened that first night." She froze, not from fear, but from the calm truth in his tone. "So what do you want from me?" she asked. "A good question." He crushed out the cigarette, looking at her for a long moment. "Maybe, just to see someone the darkness hasn't consumed yet." Her breath caught. His words were gentle, but carried a wound that had never healed. The days that followed passed in a strange, quiet rhythm. Henry rarely left the house. He had an office whose door stayed closed, and whenever he emerged, his face was unreadable. Claire spent her time reading, tending the garden with Mrs. Nolan, and occasionally glimpsing Henry from afar through the window, down the hallway, like a ghost she could never reach. She began to notice the contradictions in him. A man who once gave orders to kill, now pausing to straighten a crooked vase. A killer who took the time to teach her the proper way to pour wine. Perhaps it was those contradictions that made her unable to look away. One evening, the phone in the living room rang. Henry answered, silent for a few seconds before his expression darkened. Eli, his voice dropped. Stay quiet. Don't move until I give the signal. He hung up and strode to the porch. Claire followed him. What happened? He stopped, eyes black as an unlit sky. Versani's men. They've found traces. Here. Not yet. But soon. What do we do? His gaze hardened, a resolve she hadn't seen before. We turn this place into a trap. She stared. You're going to fight, no? He gave a cold, thin smile. I'm going to end it. That night, Claire sat by the window, watching the river. Outside, Henry directed his men installing devices, checking every corner. Floodlights lit his figure in the mist, and for a moment he looked like a general preparing for his final war. She remembered his words, blood is still blood, no matter whom it's spilled for. And she wondered this time, would he spill blood for her, or for his own redemption? When he finally came back inside, dawn was breaking. Claire sat reading the notebook he had given her. He paused at the doorway, leaning against the frame, watching her quietly. What are you reading? The things I'm afraid to say. Such as, she closed the notebook, meeting his gaze. Such as, I'm scared. But not of the people trying to kill me. Of the man trying to protect me. Henry said nothing. For a moment, he forgot how to breathe. She continued softly. I don't understand you, Henry. But when I look at you, I feel like I'm running from something too. He stepped closer, stopping right in front of her. And do you think we can keep running forever, though? She whispered. But at least, we can run together. A faint smile touched his lips. Not quite a smile, more like a thaw in eyes that had forgotten warmth. He lowered his head, voice barely above a whisper. You shouldn't say things that make people believe they can still be saved. Claire. Then he turned away, leaving her bathed in the pale light of dawn with the quiet certainty that tonight, she hadn't just stepped deeper into his world, but into the secret that might destroy them both. Morning broke over the Hudson, veiled in a silver mist that covered the river. Sunlight hadn't yet pierced through the maple trees, it only shimmered faintly on the window pane where Claire sat quietly, a cup of cold tea in her hands. 3 days had passed since she arrived at the mansion. 3 days of silence surrounded by stone walls and glances she couldn't tell were meant to protect her or watch her. Henry spoke little. He spent most of his time in his office, behind a closed wooden door. Yet even without seeing him, Claire could feel his presence in invisible gravity that kept her aware of him at all times. That morning, a knock startled her. Come in. Mrs. Nolan entered, carrying a breakfast tray. Mr. Sullivan requests that you join him for breakfast? Claire blinked. He said that he doesn't say things twice. Miss Donovan, Mrs. Nolan replied with a faint smile. And he rarely eats with anyone. The breakfast room was bathed in golden light. Henry was already seated at the head of the table, wearing a black shirt with his cuffs neatly rolled. He didn't look up as she entered, only said quietly, Sit. She obeyed, eyes drifting to the newspaper spread before him. The front page read, in bold, Versini Group expands investments to Asia. Police suspect money laundering links. Claire glanced at the headline. Versani. They're the ones who attacked us. Henry nodded. They don't just want me dead. They want to erase every trace that proves I ever existed. And I'm one of those traces. He set down his coffee cup, meeting her eyes. Yes, but no one will touch you. She froze not at the words themselves, but at the tone. Calm, steady, yet carrying a strange warmth she hadn't expected from him. After breakfast, Henry led her through the hallways of the first floor. The paintings lining the walls weren't mere decorations. They seemed to follow a deliberate order war: peace, betrayal, and finally, a rain-drenched painting of the Hudson River. "You like art?" she asked. Henry gave a dry smile. "Not exactly, but art tells the truth better than people do. It doesn't pretend to save anyone." "You sound like you hate people." "I don't," he said quietly. "I've just stopped believing that goodness can survive on its own." She said nothing. His words were like a blade sharp, raw, but they made her want to know what had made him lose his faith that way. At noon, Henry brought her to the basement, a locked area guarded by a code system. When the door opened, Claire froze. Inside wasn't a cellar or wine room, but a cold chamber filled with computers, maps, and walls chaffered with photographs, faces of people, Versani, rivals, associates, ghosts from a past she barely understood. "This is what you call resting," she whispered. Henry stood beside her, eyes fixed on a glowing red screen. "Rest is for those who have no one left to lose." She scanned the walls, then stopped at an old, faded photo. A young woman, dark hair, gentle smile, her hand resting on Henry's shoulder. "She's the one who died because of you." He nodded. "Isabella. What was she to you?" "Everything," he said softly, almost inaudibly, "and a reminder that I shouldn't love anyone again." The words tightened her chest. There was a distance between them thin as silk, yet impossible to cross. That evening, she sat in the garden, watching the sunset blaze over the river. A small bird landed on the railing, sang a few notes, then flew away. She smiled faintly, realizing she hadn't heard such peaceful sounds in a long time. "You smile when a bird flies away." Henry's voice came from behind her. She turned. He stood there, hands in his pockets, gaze softened. "I smiled because it's free," she said. "And I'm not. No one's truly free." "Claire, not even that bird. You're philosophical again," she teased gently. "Do you ever stop thinking about the world? Never. The moment I stop, it swallows me whole. And does that scare you?" Henry was silent. Then he stepped closer, near enough that his breath brushed her hair. "I'm not afraid of dying, Claire. I'm afraid of meeting her again, before I'm ready to face what I did." She looked up. The sunset painted his gray eyes crimson. In that fragile light, she realized Henry Sullivan wasn't heartless. He simply had a heart so wounded he'd sealed it shut. Every word he spoke was a way to keep others from finding the key. Later that night, when the house was quiet, Claire went down to his office. The door was unlocked. On the desk lay an open file: photos, maps, documents, and among them, a small handwritten note. "Next target, Versani, Manhattan." Her stomach knotted. She didn't know why, but fear took hold. Fear of losing the man she barely understood, yet couldn't stop caring about. "You shouldn't be here." Henry's voice came from behind her, low and quiet, but enough to make her turn sharply. He stood by the doorway, shadowed in the dim lamplight. "I didn't mean to," she said softly. "I just wanted to know who I really am." She nodded. "You're not who people say you are. That's because you haven't seen everything." He walked closer, each step deliberate. "If you knew what I've done to survive, you wouldn't be talking to me like this." "Then make me believe," she said, her voice trembling but firm. "Believe that there's still something good in you." Henry stopped, eyes narrowing slightly, gaze sinking deep into hers. "You really want to believe that? Maybe I already do." The words slipped out before she could stop them. Silence followed, thick, electric, broken only by her heartbeat. Henry let out a quiet laugh, not amused, but the sound of a man who'd just lost a game he never meant to play. "You're making this dangerous, Claire." "Dangerous for who?" "For both of us." He leaned in, close enough that she could feel the warmth of his breath. "People shouldn't trust the devil, even when he's the one holding the umbrella in the rain." Then he turned and left, leaving behind the scent of smoke and oak. Claire stood still, hand over her chest, her heartbeat wild and uneven. Even with his warning, she knew the truth somewhere deep inside. She had already crossed the line. Between reason and emotion. Between good and evil. Between fear and love. And as the moonlight shimmered over the river, reflecting on the window pane, Claire understood from this moment on, there was no way back. The wind from the Hudson carried a sharp chill and the damp scent of night mist. Upstairs in the mansion, Claire sat by the window, rereading the words in the notebook Henry had given her. Each line echoed his presence strong, restrained. Yet between the strokes, there lingered something unsaid. She didn't understand why, but reading it calmed her. Even knowing he was dangerous, even when reason urged her to keep her distance. Something about Henry kept pulling her closer. Down in the yard, men in black suits patrolled in formation, their movements precise, disciplined. From afar came the sound of footsteps blending with the wind. Everything seemed peaceful until the dog began to bark. Claire froze. The sound wasn't playful, it was short, low, and sharp. A warning. The door burst open. Henry appeared, shirt half buttoned, eyes cold as steel.
"Stay here," he said, voice low. "No matter what you hear, don't come out. What's happening?"
He didn't answer. He pulled a pistol from his coat, loading it with a click. "Versani found us." The words sliced through the air like a blade. Before she could react, he was gone, his footsteps echoing down the wooden hall. The room glowed dimly under the lamp. Claire ran to the door and peered through the crack. Outside, shadows moved silently across the courtyard, dark coats glistening with rain. They carried weapons. One of them reached into his pocket, then hurled something. A dry explosion shook the house. Glass shattered. Flames erupted from the garage. Then came the shouting gunfire, splitting the night. Claire stumbled back, heart racing with every shot. Henry had anticipated this, but not this soon. Without thinking, she darted into the bathroom, tore open the medicine cabinet, and grabbed a bottle of hydrogen peroxide. Her biochemistry instincts kicked in. She remembered its reaction with heat, how it could create thick white smoke. She ripped a curtain, soaked it in the liquid, stuffed it into a glass bottle, and lit the edge with a lighter. Her hands trembled, but her eyes stayed firm. If Henry was fighting, she wasn't going to hide. Footsteps echoed outside the hall. A man dressed in black pushed the door open, face half hidden beneath his cap. Claire crouched behind the wardrobe. When he stepped closer, she threw the smoke bomb. It went off with a pop-white smoke filling the room. The man coughed violently. Claire grabbed a wooden candlestick from the table and swung it against his shoulder. The blow staggered him, but didn't drop him. He turned, eyes burning. "You little," a gunshot cracked. Henry stood at the doorway, Glock smoking in his hand. The bullet tore through the man's shoulder, dropping him to the floor. "Are you hurt?" Henry asked, rushing to her. She shook her head, panting. "I'm fine. You still breathing? But they're more than I expected." He grabbed her hand, pulling her toward the stairs. Bullets struck the walls, sparks bursting in the dark. Claire clung to him, every breath ragged, every step a heartbeat closer to chaos. Yet, strangely, she wasn't afraid, not while he was in front of her, solid as a wall between her and death. They reached the kitchen. Henry slammed the door shut, pressed his hand against the wall, and twisted a hidden lever. A steel panel slid open behind the wine rack. "Emergency exit," he said hoarsely. "Go. What about you?" "You first." "No, I'm not leaving you." His gaze locked onto hers, deep enough to make her chest tighten. "Claire," he said softly, "I've already lost someone because I stayed. I won't lose another. And I won't let you die alone," she whispered, voice trembling but resolute. He studied her for a moment, then smiled faintly. "You really don't know fear." "No, Henry," she said. "I just don't want to live with regret." He nodded. "All right, then we go together." Outside, the courtyard was ablaze, trees shredded by bullets, firelight flashing on steel and smoke. Henry pulled Claire behind a car and signaled to Eli across the yard. 3 on the east side. Eli's voice crackled through the radio. "More may be circling through the woods." Henry nodded. "Hold your ground, on my signal, hit them from both sides." He turned to Claire. "Stay here." "No," she said, shaking her head. "I can help." He froze when he saw the bottle of peroxide and the lighter in her hand. "You're not..." They're moving in. I can create cover smoke for you. He hesitated a second, then nodded. Be careful. When it spreads, stay low. Claire threw the bottle forward. A soft boom followed, smoke billowing thick and white. Gunfire erupted Henry's shots, sharp and precise. 3 bursts. Silence. When the haze cleared, 3 black-clad bodies lay motionless on the grass. Let's move, Henry said, gripping her hand. We're out of time. They ran toward the woods. In the distance, police sirens wailed. Someone had called for backup. Henry paused, looking back at the burning mansion. Everything you owned, Claire whispered. He replied quietly, almost at peace. Just bricks and memories. I can rebuild. And the memories? He didn't answer. For a brief second, she saw the pain in his eyes, grief that no fire could ever erase. At the forest's edge, another gunshot rang out. Claire felt herself pulled aside, Henry's arm wrapped around her. The bullet hit his shoulder. Henry? He grimaced, staggering but steady. It's fine. Keep moving. You're bleeding. He forced a smile. You think this is new to me? Sweat glistened on his forehead. She tore off her coat, wrapped it around his wound, hands trembling as his blood soaked through warm, metallic. Stop talking. I'm getting you out. They'd barely gone a few steps when a shadow lunged from behind a tree. Claire screamed. Henry reacted instantly, pulling a knife from his belt, twisting, striking. Both men fell to the ground. When Henry rose, his shoulder quivered. The attacker lay still, blood spreading across the wet soil. Claire froze at the sight. You killed him. Henry turned, his voice like ice. If I hadn't, he'd have killed you. She couldn't speak. Fear, pain, and something nameless tangled in her chest. Henry saw it, stepped closer, and cupped her face in his hand. Don't look at me like that. Claire, I don't kill because I want to. I kill because I have no choice. His voice cracked with exhaustion. She looked into his eyes and saw more than darkness, saw the loneliness buried beneath it, deep enough to drown in. You need rest, she whispered. Let me help. He nodded weakly, letting her guide him step by heavy step through the rain-soaked forest. That night, they took shelter in an old storage shed by the river. Claire found bandages, cleaned his wound, and stitched it shut with the precision of someone who hadn't forgotten her medical training. Henry clenched his jaw, never crying out, just watching her, his eyes filled with both pain and gratitude. You're better than half the doctors I've ever paid, he murmured. And you should learn not to make people worry, she said, refusing to meet his eyes. He smiled faintly. Worried about me? No, she replied, though her voice shook. I'd just hate to think all my effort was wasted if you died. Henry laughed softly, tired, but genuine. You talk like someone who's never killed. Yet you just saved the most damned man alive, Claire whispered. I only save those who are hurting. Henry stared at her for a long moment, then said quietly, almost like a confession. And I am afraid I'm starting to love the one who just saved my life. Claire froze, the needle still in her hand. She didn't answer, but her fingers trembled, and in the dim light, Henry saw a single tear falling from her lashes onto his shoulder, mingling with the drying blood. Morning settled quietly over the Hudson. The river mirrored a pale gray sky, and the air smelled of wet grass after a night of rain. Claire sat by the warehouse window, hands resting on her knees, eyes fixed on the man sleeping in the corner, Henry. The light fell across his face, tracing every sharp line, the firm jaw, the closed lips, the furrowed brow of a man still fighting even in his dreams. The wound on his shoulder was carefully bandaged, but Claire knew the real pain wasn't physical. It lived deeper in the loneliness he never spoke of. She rose and walked toward him. Every time she saw him asleep, she was reminded no matter how strong he seemed. At rest, he was just human weary, broken, and heartbreakingly fragile. She reached out to adjust the blanket. Before she could touch it, his hand shot up, gripping her wrist tightly. Don't come closer, he muttered, voice hoarse, eyes wide, instincts flaring. Claire startled. It's me. It took him a few seconds to recognize her. His gaze softened. He exhaled and released her hand. Sorry, he said quietly. Reflex. Did you have a nightmare? He paused, then murmured, The things I've done. They don't leave me, not even when I sleep. Claire sat beside him. No one can erase their past. Henry, but you can choose not to let it define you. He gave a short, tired laugh. You talk like I still have a choice. You always do, she replied softly. You're still breathing. Still alive. That's choice enough. Henry looked at her, long enough for something to flicker in his eyes, a faint shift between disbelief and yearning. You don't know who you're talking to. Claire, he whispered. I've ordered men killed, burned a city to erase evidence. Can someone like that ever do something different? Yes, she said firmly, by stopping. He said nothing, but the silence carried both pain and a strange warmth. By noon, Henry was fully awake. Claire helped him change his bandages, her touch light and careful, as though afraid to hurt him. You'll need a few more days to rest, she said. No time, he answered. Versani won't stop. They think I died in the explosion. But that rumor won't hold. What are you going to do? Strike before they can... Claire frowned. You barely survived. Henry, don't throw yourself back into it. He smiled faintly. You talk like you care. She didn't respond, but her eyes said enough. By late afternoon, Henry sat outside the warehouse, gazing at the river. The sunset painted his face in warm light, but the wound on his shoulder looked darker by contrast. Claire brought 2 cups of coffee, setting one beside him. Thanks, he murmured. I thought you'd be gone by now. I considered it, she said, eyes on the water. But I realized I couldn't, not because I'm afraid of Versani, but because I couldn't leave you alone. Henry tilted his head, studying her. Being alone is something I'm used to. Doesn't mean it doesn't hurt. He said nothing. A soft wind brushed past, scattering a few leaves. Henry's hand lowered the cup, his fingers brushed hers. She tensed, but didn't pull away. Their eyes met wordless, steady. They both knew something was growing between them, quiet but fierce, like an ember buried deep in ash. That night, Claire couldn't sleep. She stepped outside, watching the moonlight ripple over the river. From afar came the soft rhythm of water against stone, like a heartbeat. Henry appeared behind her, the hem of his white shirt stirring in the wind. Running from sleep. Can't seem to, she whispered. Every time I close my eyes, I see fire and gunshots. He stood beside her without a word. After a while, he exhaled. Me too. She turned to look at him. Under the moonlight, his face seemed softer blurred and heartbreakingly real. Henry, she asked gently, have you ever thought about walking away from all of it as, he said, but I wouldn't know where to go. I belong to the dark. Claire, where there's light, there's no place for me. You're wrong, she whispered. Light doesn't fear darkness, it just needs a reason to shine through it. He looked at her eyes somewhere between a smile and sorrow. And you're that reason. She said nothing. But the tilt of her head, the small breath she took, said everything. He stepped closer, his hand brushing hers. You're doing something dangerous. Claire, dangerous to trust you. Dangerous because you're making me want to believe in something I buried long ago. The space between them shrank to a single breath. She saw his eyes fall to her lips, then retreat, as if he were fighting himself. Henry turned away, inhaling deeply. I can't by whose rules, she asked softly, trembling. My own, he said with a weary smile. I won't let you be another person I hurt. She stared at him. Maybe you're already hurting because you keep trying not to feel. He didn't answer, but his silence spoke more than words ever could. The next morning, a phone call shattered the fragile calm. Henry's tone dropped instantly. Eli, yeah, I'm fine. What's the update? A pause. Then he shot up from his chair. What? Who told you I was in Hudson? Claire looked up, alarmed. What's wrong? Someone in my organization betrayed me, sold our location to Versani. She froze. Who? I don't know yet. But it could be someone I trusted most. He clenched the phone, gray eyes flashing with anger Claire had never seen before. Eli's checking. If it's true, I'll end it myself. You can't keep answering violence with violence. Henry, she pleaded. He turned, eyes cold. What do you want me to do? Wait for them to kill me and you? She stepped back, voice breaking. I just don't want you to lose what makes you different from them. That stopped him. The rage faded, leaving exhaustion in its place. He looked at her for a long time before whispering, You don't understand. Claire, when you live too long in darkness, you forget what light feels like. And if you touch it again, you're terrified it'll disappear. Her eyes shimmered. Then let me stay so you don't have to be afraid anymore. Henry's gaze trembled, as though something inside him was collapsing a wall built over years. He didn't speak. He simply lifted his hand, touching her cheek. His warmth spread through her skin, and in that fragile moment, they both knew whatever this was. It had already gone beyond control. That night, the rain returned. Claire woke to the sound of wind scraping the tin roof and thunder rolling in the distance. Henry was still awake, sitting in the corner, eyes fixed on a map. You haven't slept, she asked softly. He didn't look up. I can't. Because you're afraid. Because I know that if I close my eyes, you might be gone. She walked over, gently resting her hand on his shoulder. I'm not going anywhere. Henry turned to her, and for the first time, she didn't see the leader, the fighter, or the ghost of a man the world feared. She saw someone losing faith in himself. He reached out, taking her hand, pulling her closer. Claire, he whispered, if I don't make it out alive, remember this once. There was a sinner who loved you with everything human left in him. Tears slid down her cheeks, silent and unstoppable. Outside, lightning split the sky, illuminating two shadows inside the small wooden shack where a forbidden love quietly burned against the darkness. The rain from the night before had washed away every trace from the ground, but not the unease still lingering in the air. In the morning, Henry stood on the porch, cigarette in hand, staring out at the dirt road fading into the misty woods. Inside the small cabin, Claire was folding the blanket, the same one he had draped over her when she'd fallen asleep in the chair. No one said it aloud, but both of them knew this peace was only temporary. Henry stubbed out his cigarette and turned back inside. Eli's on his way. You trust him? Claire asked. He paused, a flicker of hesitation crossing his eyes. I used to, but trust is like a bullet once it's fired. It never comes back. By noon, the sound of an engine broke the stillness. A dusty SUV pulled up to the gate. Eli stepped out, still carrying the air of a soldier long after the war leather jacket. Sunburnt jawline, cautious eyes. He smiled faintly when he saw Henry. Henry, Eli said, shaking his head. Jesus, you're alive. I thought rumors. Henry interrupted coolly, his gaze never leaving Eli's face. Come in. Claire watched from behind the door. When Eli entered, his eyes landed on her, curious at first, then faintly surprised. This is Claire, Henry said, the one I owe my life to. Eli nodded, smirking slightly. Lucky man. Not everyone finds someone willing to stand by them right now. Claire replied softly. Sometimes you stay beside someone not because you're brave, but because you can't do otherwise. For a brief moment, both men fell silent. Henry looked at her, his eyes filled with something between gratitude and fear. Over lunch, Eli shared what he'd learned from New York Versani's network was expanding, and someone inside Henry's organization was leaking information. Henry listened in silence, but Claire noticed his knuckles whitening around the glass he held. Who do you suspect? Henry asked. Eli shrugged. Not sure yet. Could be one of the inner guards, or someone closer than you think. Their eyes met just for a second, but it was enough for Claire to feel a chill run through her spine. Something unspoken passed between them. Later that afternoon, Henry received a message on his encrypted phone. Only one line appeared on the screen. The traitor is sitting right in front of you. His face didn't change, but when he looked up, something in his eyes had deeper, harder, as if a quiet disappointment had just been confirmed. Claire, he said softly, go out back. I need to speak to Eli alone. She hesitated. The look he gave her made her heart skip, not a warning, but a silent plea. Trust me. Claire stepped outside. From behind the wall, she could hear their voices low at first,
then rising. How long? Eli Henry's voice cold as steel. I don't know what you're talking about. Don't play dumb. You think I don't know who sent Versani the Hudson coordinates, Henry? Listen to me. You sold me out. How much did they pay? Silence. Then a chair fell, followed by the unmistakable click of a gun being cocked. Claire ran in. Stop! Henry was aiming his gun at Eli, eyes blazing. Eli stood with his hands raised, face pale, part fear, part fury. Henry, I didn't betray you, Eli shouted. They've got people inside the FBI. I was trying to keep you alive by leading them straight to my door. Henry's voice was low, shaking with rage. You were my brother, Eli. You swore to protect my family. Remember. The word family hit Claire like a shock. She had never heard him mention it before. Eli let out a bitter laugh. Family. You lost that a long time ago. Now all you have left is her. He glanced at Claire, a strange meaning in his eyes. And that's your weakness. Henry said nothing. For a moment, darkness swept over him, and before Claire could move, he pulled the trigger. The bullet tore through Eli's shoulder. He fell with a cry. Henry Claire shouted, rushing forward, Stop, you're becoming what you hate. He froze. The gun still aimed, but his finger slipped from the trigger. His breath came fast, sweat glinting on his forehead. He deserves it, he whispered. Maybe. But if you kill him, you'll stop being the man I believe in. Henry shut his eyes. Then he lowered the gun, his entire body sagging as if the weight of years had just fallen on him. Eli, he muttered, voice hollow. Get out, before I change my mind. Eli clutched his wound, eyes flashing between gratitude and resentment. Someday you'll understand. Henry, sometimes betrayal is the only way to save someone. He limped out into the night. When darkness fell, Henry sat alone by the fireplace, untouched glass of whiskey in his hand. Claire sat quietly beside him. Everything you believed in collapsed today, she said softly. No, he murmured. It collapsed long ago. Today, I just finally saw it clearly. What will you do now? Continue. He lifted his gaze, the firelight catching in his cold gray eyes. Versani thinks love made me weak. They'll learn that love makes a man willing to do anything. Claire's voice trembled. Anything. Even kill. He looked at her, expression unreadable. Even die. She reached out, placing her hand over his. Henry, she said gently, you don't have to prove anything anymore. You're not a monster. You're just someone who's gone too far to find his way back. His eyes softened. You don't understand. Claire, in my world, the ones who survive aren't the strongest, they're the most ruthless. And I'm tired of being that man. Then stop, she whispered. I'll go with you. Wherever you go. He smiled faintly, tired, but real. He brushed his fingers against her cheek, the fire flickering in both their eyes. You don't know what you're saying, he murmured. Going with me means there's no way back. Then don't go back, she whispered, half plea, half promise. The room fell silent, except for the soft crackle of fire. Henry leaned forward and pressed his lips gently to her forehead, a trembling kiss, fragile as if he feared to wake something sacred and dangerous at once. When Claire left the room, Henry remained. He picked up his phone, opening the last message Eli had sent before disappearing. Check the one inside. She's not as harmless as she seems. Henry stared at the words for a long time. Then his gaze lifted toward the door Claire had just closed behind her, where her scent still lingered, faint and warm. A cold wind slipped through the crack in the door, making the fire waver. Henry closed his eyes. He didn't know if the weight growing inside his chest was love, or the first whisper of a tragedy yet to come. Winter had arrived. The first cold wind swept through the forest, carrying the scent of dry leaves and frost that made Claire shiver. Inside the small wooden cabin by the river, Henry sat before a spread-out map, a red pen frozen midair as though he'd just seen something only he could understand. Claire poured more coffee and set the cup beside him. You haven't slept in 2 nights, she said, her voice soft as mist. Henry didn't look up. I can't. Versani won't stop until they see my body. But if you keep running, she murmured. You'll run out of places to go. He lifted his head, exhaustion shadowing his eyes, tinged with bitterness. And what about you, Claire? Don't you regret following me this far? She didn't answer. Instead, she simply looked at him, her gaze so steady that Henry had to look away. No, she said quietly. I only regret that you never believed you deserved forgiveness. He gave a faint, joyless smile. Forgiveness isn't for people like me. It only makes you weak, and hate makes you strong. He fell silent. For a long moment, the only sound in the room was the slow ticking of the wall clock. By afternoon, snow began to fall, the first flakes of the season, landing softly on the window ledge. Claire stepped outside, watching the river slowly crust over with ice. In the reflection of the frosted glass, Henry's shadow stood behind her, a lone figure framed in silver light. She didn't know when it had happened, but somewhere along the way, her heart had stopped seeing Henry as the dangerous man she should fear and started seeing him as someone she needed to save, even if her kindness would one day break her.
When she returned, Henry was on the satellite phone. His voice was low, hoarse, and tense. No, don't call again. I said the plan's off. A pause. Eli's out. I'll handle it myself. He hung up and turned. His face stiffened when he saw her standing there. Who were you talking to, she asked. No one important. Henry, don't lie to me. His eyes darkened. Are you accusing me of something? No. But I know you're hiding something. He stepped closer, each movement tightening the air between them. You really want to know? Yes. Henry stopped inches from her, gaze piercing. I made a deal with one of Versani's men. If I hand over the list of their offshore accounts, they'll leave you alone. Claire froze. You're trading your life for mine. Not my life, he said, my past. But they'll never keep their word. What other choice do I have? His voice rose, sharp with frustration. You think I wanted to drag you into this? She met his eyes, tears welling, but voice steady. You think I stayed because you forced me? I stayed because I wanted to. Even if the world calls you a monster, I still see a flicker of light in you. Henry went still. Her words cracked something open in him, something he'd buried for years. He turned away and walked out into the snow. She called after him, but he didn't stop. That night, the snow fell thick. Henry stood alone on the porch, his shoulders dusted white. Claire put on her coat and stepped out. You're leaving. He didn't turn. I can't let you stay. They'll find me soon. And when they do, you'll be the first thing they use to break me. Are you afraid they'll hurt me or afraid you will? He said nothing. The question cut deeper than any blade. Henry, she whispered, I've seen you kill. I've seen you bleed, lose, and grieve. But I've never seen you as weak as when you lie to me. You tell me to go, but your eyes are begging me to stay. Henry turned. His gray eyes burned in the snowlight ashes glowing in fire. He stepped closer, one slow step at a time, until their breaths mingled in the cold air. I can't promise your safety, he whispered. I can't even promise I'll live. But if you stay, I can't promise I won't love you. Claire smiled softly, tears shining like glass. Then don't stop yourself. He kissed her. It wasn't gentle, it was fierce, desperate, the kind of kiss that felt like he was breathing life back into himself. Snow fell around them, and for that brief moment, the world burned and froze at once, leaving only warmth, only heartbeat. But before peace could settle, a sharp sound cut through the night, 3 short blasts of a car horn. Henry's eyes snapped open, his face turning stone cold. They've found us. Before Claire could react, he grabbed her hand, pulling her inside. The lights went out. Darkness swallowed the room. Outside, headlights swept across the windows cold, white blades slicing the night. Go through the back, he whispered. There's a tunnel leading to the riverbank. What about you? I'll hold them off. No, I'm not leaving you again, Claire. His hands gripped her shoulders, voice breaking with urgency. If you love me, please, don't look back. She stared at him, the moonlight dividing his face in two, one half light, one half shadow. Then she nodded. Promise me you'll live. His reply came low and rough. If there's a way out, I'll find you.
She ran, footsteps pounding, wind howling, gunfire cracking behind her, each shot tearing through her chest like another heartbeat breaking. When she reached the river, she turned. The cabin, the place where so much was left unsaid, was now engulfed in flames. Claire collapsed to her knees in the snow, tears mixing with the cold. "Henry," she whispered, her voice lost in the wind. A deafening explosion followed, lighting up the night sky. She shielded her eyes, heart frozen in her chest. In that moment, she understood sometimes love isn't about staying together. It's about knowing that even in death, the other still lives within your memory. The wind howled harder. The frozen river heaved, carrying away the last ashes of the burning house. And amid the endless white, a gray wool scarf, Henry's, drifted to her feet. She picked it up with trembling hands, pressed it to her chest, afraid it might vanish too. In the distance, blue police lights flickered across the sky. Claire rose, turned her back to the ruins, and walked away unaware that somewhere beyond the shadows, a pair of gray eyes were still watching her, alive but carrying a wound no bullet could ever heal. 3 months after the explosion on the Hudson, winter came to Boston. Snow blanketed the streets, and the yellow streetlights cast soft glows on the sidewalks like fading fragments of memory. Claire now lived in a small apartment near the harbor gray-painted walls, windows facing the sea. Her life had narrowed to quiet routines, working at the bookstore, coming home early, and writing in the notebook Henry had once given her. The last page remained blank, because she couldn't write another word without knowing whether he was still alive. Every night she dreamed of Henry in the snow, in the firelight, in the echo of gunfire that still pounded in her heart. And every morning, she touched the gray wool scarf he'd left behind. It was worn now, but still faintly smelled of smoke and wood. Sometimes she wondered whether he'd really died in that explosion, or simply vanished from her world like a dream that refused to end. One snowy afternoon, while she was arranging books in the shop, the door opened. A tall man stepped inside, coat long, scarf wrapped around his neck. Claire looked up, and her heart stopped. Everything inside her froze, her breath, her pulse, the world. Henry stood there, thinner than before, his hair longer, his face hollowed, but his gray eyes, those eyes were the same ones that had once looked at her through the falling snow. "You?" Her voice broke, the words fading like smoke. Henry smiled faintly, a small, weary, but real smile. "I promised I'd find you if I survived." She burst into tears, running to him. His body was cold, but his breath achingly warm. She hit his chest with trembling fists, sobbing. "You promised to live, but you made me believe you were dead." Henry said nothing. He just let her cry, one hand on her back, holding her close, an apology that no words could contain. Later, they sat by the window of the small cafe across the street. Henry told her everything. He'd been badly injured, rescued by an old contact, and hidden in Canada. He waited until Versani's empire had completely collapsed before coming back. "Eli helped me," he said quietly. "He fooled Versani into thinking I was truly dead." "You forgave him?" "No," Henry said, his voice low. "But I understand. Sometimes betrayal is the only way left to protect someone." Claire looked at him and saw that he had changed. He was still Henry, but something inside him had softened. The coldness and guilt were still there. But now there was something human behind them, fragile, breakable, real. In the days that followed, Henry rented a small apartment near the docks, only a few streets from hers. At first, they rarely met. He kept his distance, as if afraid his presence might shatter the fragile peace she had rebuilt. But Claire knew he couldn't stay away completely. One evening, she knocked on his door. Henry opened it, surprised, but silent. "Planning to hide from me for another 3 months?" she asked, her tone light but sharp. He chuckled softly. "I didn't want to drag you back into it. How many times are you going to say that until you believe I don't deserve to be near you?" Claire stepped closer, looking him straight in the eye. "Henry, I don't need someone perfect. I just need someone who won't leave me in the middle of a snowstorm." He froze, then let out a long breath as if something heavy inside him had finally cracked. "You always know how to make me surrender." "No, Henry," she whispered. I just remind you that your heart's still there." From that day on, they walked together again, no longer as the hunted and the savior, but as two people learning how to begin again. Yet the past lingered like a shadow that refused to fade. One morning, Claire came to visit and found Henry sitting at his desk, staring at an open file. The light caught his face, and for a moment, she saw again the cold edge of the man who had once lived among blood and silence. "You're still not free of it, are you?" Henry didn't answer. He closed the folder and said quietly, "I'm being watched. A small remnant of Versani's network survived. They think I'm the last link to erase. Are you going to fight them again?" He shook his head. "No, I just want to end this without more blood. And if you can't, then I'll be the one to pay." His words made her tremble. "Henry, don't you understand I lost you once? I can't do it again." He reached out, his rough hand brushing her cheek. His voice was hoarse. "Claire, I survived just to see you one more time. But if disappearing again is what it takes to keep you safe, I will." She clutched his hand, tears spilling over. "You call that love if you love me. Stay. Don't keep sacrificing yourself." He didn't reply. He just pulled her close, letting her tears soak into his shirt. The next day, Henry was gone. No note, only an envelope left on the counter of her bookstore. Inside was a single sheet of paper. "If I don't return, don't look for me. Some debts only end when the last man pays the price." Claire collapsed, the letter trembling in her hands. She knew this time he wasn't running. He was ending it. 3 days later, the news broke gunfire erupts at Pier 12. Multiple bodies found, believed connected to remnants of the Versani syndicate. Henry's name wasn't on the list of the dead, but there was no sign he'd survived, either. Claire went to the pier. The sky was gray with fog, the waves slapping against the frozen shore, among the debris and cigarette butts floating on the water. She saw a silver lighter drift toward the edge, engraved with the initials. She picked it up, holding it tight, tears streaming down her face. Henry had once said, "If I die, as long as something of mine remains, it means I'm still alive somewhere inside you." And so she believed he hadn't truly gone, that some people never disappear because their names are carved into your soul. That night, snow fell again. Claire sat by the window, opened Henry's notebook, and wrote on the final page, "You were never a monster. Henry, you were just a man who learned to love too late." She set down the pen, smiling faintly through her tears. Outside, a lone figure stood beneath the dim streetlight long coat, gray scarf around his neck. He didn't come in. He only watched her through the glass for a moment, then turned and walked away. But in that fleeting instant, Claire knew more clearly than ever before Henry was still alive. And sometimes, to live simply means knowing the one you love is still somewhere in this world. February. Boston lay buried under snow. The sky was pale gray, with slow drifting clouds that seemed to carry memories refusing to fade. Claire stood by the window of her small apartment, watching snowflakes trace delicate paths down the glass. It had been exactly 1 year since the night Henry disappeared at the pier, a year without news, without a trace, only a quiet ache and a fragile faith that somewhere in this world, he was still alive. She still worked at the same old bookstore, still walked the same streets, still made 2 cups of coffee each morning, one for herself, and one for the man who never came back. People called her crazy, but Claire knew love doesn't need a reason to exist. It only needs a heart that refuses to let go. That afternoon, the snow stopped. A thin ray of sunlight streamed through the window, warming the small room. Claire turned on her old radio, and the soft hum of jazz filled the air, the same song Henry used to play when they were together by the Hudson. She closed her eyes and let the melody take her back to mornings that smelled of coffee and wind, to nights where he taught her how to count time by breathing, and to the whispers he made in the dark, promising that if there was another life, he just wanted peace. A knock sounded at the door. She thought it was the mailman and called out, "It's open." The door creaked. Footsteps slow, steady. And then, that voice low, rough, familiar enough to stop her heart. "You still listen to jazz on snowy afternoons?" Claire. She turned around, Henry? He stood in the pale evening light, the gray scarf around his neck, his storm-gray eyes as deep as the Hudson in winter.
Thinner, sunburned, but still the man she had loved imperfect, but achingly real. "You," she whispered, tears spilling over. "You were dead."
He smiled faintly. "So did I, until I woke up in a small hospital outside Quebec. Eli saved me again, and then disappeared. It took months to find your trail." She rushed forward, throwing her arms around him. Her embrace trembled, desperate, as though afraid he might vanish into smoke. Henry leaned close, murmuring by her ear, "I promised I'd come back. I never forgot that promise." They sat by the window, two steaming cups between them. In the warmth of that silence, time seemed to stop. Henry spoke softly. "Versani's gone. Completely wiped out. I sold everything, cut every tie. I'm no one now, no name, no past. And the future?" Claire asked. He looked at her and smiled a small, fragile smile that reached his eyes. "The future's something I didn't dare to imagine. Until I found you." She reached out, laying her hand over his, "Then hold on to it." He squeezed her hand, the warmth between them speaking a vow without words. Night fell. The city was quiet, wrapped in snowlight. They sat by the fire, its glow dancing across the scars on his shoulder, the old wound from the Hudson Pier. Claire touched it gently. "It hasn't healed." "Some wounds shouldn't," he said. "They remind us that we once lived, once erred, and once loved." "And did you truly love, Henry?" He met her gaze. The firelight flickered in his eyes. "I didn't know what love was until you didn't save me with kindness, you saved me with truth. You made me want to become someone you could believe in." She laughed softly through her tears. "I've waited a whole year to hear that." He leaned down and kissed her. The kiss was slow and tender, no longer the hunger of fugitives, but the calm of two souls finally at rest. The next morning, Boston glowed under a clear blue sky. Henry stood on the balcony, watching children toss snowballs in the street below. Claire brought 2 cups of tea and leaned her head on his shoulder. "What will you do now?" she asked. "There's an old friend in Seattle," he said. "He offered to help me start a private security firm. Legal, clean?" She smiled. "A new beginning?" He nodded. "No more running, no more blood, just life." She looked at him, half teasing. "And me, do I fit into that life?" Henry hesitated for a moment, then said quietly, "You're the only reason I want to live." Claire rested her head on his shoulder and closed her eyes. In that stillness, she knew it was over, not because the world forgave them, but because they had learned to forgive themselves. That evening, Henry went out briefly to meet a courier. When he returned, he carried a small wrapped box. He set it on the table. "For you." Claire opened it. Inside was a new black notebook, identical to the one he'd given her back in Hudson. On the first page, he had written, "We don't need our past to define us. We just need the one who still holds our hand in the present." She smiled through her tears. "You always write things that hurt too much to read twice." Henry chuckled, his voice soft as wind. "Then write this time. No more blood, just words and light." She nodded. "We'll write together." The following spring, sunlight poured over Seattle. A small company opened near Lake Union. Its sign read Sullivan and Donovan Security Consulting. Henry wore a crisp white shirt, Claire, a long coat, holding a bouquet of white tulips. No one in the crowd recognized the man who'd once been a ghost of the underworld. He was just another man now, steady, ordinary, and at peace. When the ceremony ended, Henry turned to her with a quiet smile. "Do you think people can really start over after walking through hell?" "Not only can they," she said, "they can love again." He took her hand, and in that moment, sunlight glinted off the faint scar on his shoulder, the last trace of darkness fading from a man who had once lived by sin. Late that night, when everyone had gone, Henry and Claire sat by the lake. The wind was gentle, rippling the water's surface. "If one day I disappear again," he began softly. She cut in, smiling. "Then I'll find you the way you once found me." He laughed quietly, warmth flickering in his eyes. "I believe you would." They sat in silence, watching the moon ripple on the lake's surface. A chapter closed not with tears, but with the quiet certainty that love, after all, is strong enough to heal even the most wounded souls. If this story touched your heart, follow the channel and share your thoughts below. Every comment is a spark that helps future stories come alive and reach more hearts.